An explosion shatters Xylara's crystal core, and Toren Valen, a human engineer, is framed as the culprit. In this alien city of glowing spires, silver collars choke every emotion, marking him an outsider. The High Council's fake proof tightens the trap, with drones hunting him down. Queen Mirae Voryn, her golden eyes hiding secrets, could save or doom him. As collars spark and Xylara teeters, someone's plotting chaos, and Toren's the perfect pawn. But Toren's no pawn. With razor-sharp wit and a rebel's heart, he'll unravel the lies, spark a revolution, and maybe win a queen. Can he free a world chained by silence? Dive into See. Subscribe and hit the bell to join Toren's fight. New sci-fi chapters drop daily. The air in Luminaris, capital of Xylara, shimmered with a crystalline haze, as if the city itself were carved from a single, breathing jewel. Spires of translucent quartz pierced the violet sky, refracting light into rainbows that danced across streets paved with obsidian. The people moved like shadows, silent, purposeful, their pearlescent green skin catching the glow of their city. Every neck bore a sleek, silver collar of control, pulsing faintly with blue light, a reminder that emotions were a relic of a buried past. This was Xylara, a world where chaos had been tamed, or so they thought, until the explosion. The blast erupted at the heart of the crystal spire, the towering nexus of Xylara's energy grid. A fireball roared upward, shattering quartz in a glittering shrapnel that rained like comets. The shockwave rippled through the capital, toppling drones and sending cracks spiderwebbing across the pristine streets. Xylarians froze, their collars flashing in unison, processing the anomaly with mechanical calm. No screams, no panic, just the eerie hum of a city recalibrating. And there, at the edge of the blast zone, stood Toren Valen, a human who didn't belong. 32 years old, with a mop of dark hair and a 5 o'clock shadow, he looked like he'd just rolled out of spaceship crash and decided to make the best of it. His worn leather jacket was singed at the hem, and his boots crunched on broken crystal as he took a long drag from his vape. The device hissed, releasing a cloud of citrus-scented mist that curled around his face like a rebellious halo. "Well, damn," Toren muttered, squinting at the smoldering spire. "That's one way to make an entrance." He wasn't supposed to be here. Not in the middle of a disaster, anyway. Toren was a contract engineer, hired to fix Xylara's failing energy core, a job that was supposed to be his ticket back to respectability. The United Coalition had kicked him out 2 years ago, branding him a liability after he'd pitched a fusion reactor design so wild it made their bureaucrats sweat. Too risky, they'd said. Too reckless. The same folks who'd blamed him when his prototype failed and cost his best friend, Marcus, his life. Toren still saw Marcus's face in his dreams. Laughing 1 minute, gone next. Xylara was his last shot. Fix their core, get paid, maybe buy a ship and disappear into the stars. But standing here, watching drones swarm like angry wasps, he had a sinking feeling his plans were about to take a detour. "Hey, buddy," Toren called to a passing Xylarian, a tall figure in a flowing silver tunic. "You guys always blow up your own stuff? Or is this a special occasion?" The Xylarian didn't even glance his way. Their collar pulsed, and they kept walking, steps measured, eyes blank. Toren snorted, puffing another cloud of vape. "Tough crowd. Gotta work on my material." He turned back to the wreckage, his engineer's brain already picking apart. The blast pattern was too precise, focused, not random. Someone had targeted the spire's core, and it wasn't him. He'd been calibrating conduits half a mile away when the world went boom. But try telling that to the locals. As if on cue, a squad of Xylarian guards materialized, their armor gleaming like liquid mercury. Their collars flashed red, and their staffs hummed with energy. Toren raised his hands, vape still dangling from his fingers. "Whoa, whoa, fellas," he said, flashing a grin that was half Tony Stark swagger, half Peter Quill charm. "I know I'm irresistible, but no need to roll out the welcome party." "Human," the lead guard intoned, voice flat as a computer. "You are Toren Valen, contractor, Earth origin." "That's me. Star of the show, apparently." Toren tilted his head, eyeing the guard's staff. Nice stick. Compensating for something. The guard ignored him, collar pulsing. You are charged with sabotage of a crystal spire. Evidence confirms your possession of a detonation device. Toren's grin faltered. Say what now? I fix things, pal, not blow them up. Check my toolbox. Screwdrivers, not bombs. Silence. Another guard snapped, raising a scanner. A holographic screen flickered to life, showing grainy footage of a man who looked suspiciously like Toren. Same jacket, same messy hair. Tinkering with a device near the spire's base. The timestamp read 30 minutes ago. Toren's stomach dropped. That's not me, he said, leaning closer. I mean, nice jacket, but I was elbow deep in conduits when this went down. You got witnesses, right? Tracking data. The lead guard's collar flashed brighter. The evidence is conclusive. You'll face the High Council. Conclusive? That's a fancy word for fake as hell. Toren crossed his arms, vape hissing. I'm telling you, someone's playing you. And I'm not a fan of being the fall guy. The guards didn't respond. Instead, they closed in, staffs crackling. Toren sighed, taking one last drag. Fine, lead the way. But if this is about my parking tickets, I swear I paid those off. A sharp jab from a staff sent electricity surging through his body. Toren grunted, vision blurring as he crumpled to the ground. The last thing he saw was his vape rolling across the crystal pavement, its citrus mist fading into the chaos. He woke to darkness, or what passed for it in a Xylarian prison. The cell was a perfect sphere of polished quartz, walls glowing with a soft, oppressive light that cast his reflection in every direction. No corners, no shadows, just him trapped in a kaleidoscope of his own face. His jacket was gone, his boots too, leaving him in a plain gray shirt and pants. The air was cool, sterile, and smelled faintly of ozone. Great, Toren muttered, running a hand through his hair. 5-star accommodations. Where's the room service? He stood, testing the walls. Smooth as glass, warm to the touch, and humming with faint energy. Xylarian tech was next level, part crystal, part magic, as far as he was concerned. He'd spent weeks studying their energy core, a marvel of engineering that pulsed like a living heart. But this cell? This was a cage designed to break you without trying. All right, let's think, he said, pacing in a circle. Explosion, fake video, guards with zero sense of humor. Someone wants me out of the picture. Question is why? His mind flicked back to the spire. The blast wasn't random. It had crippled the energy grid but not destroyed it. A warning, maybe? Or a setup to destabilize Xylara's rulers. He'd heard whispers about their High Queen, Mirae Voryn, a figure shrouded in myth. They said she was the only one who could override the collars, but no one had seen her lose control. Not in centuries. Toren stopped pacing, a memory surfacing. Marcus, his old partner, grinning over a beer back on Earth. You're too curious, T, he'd said. One day, you'll poke the wrong beast and get burned. Marcus had been right about a lot of things. He'd trusted Toren's reactor design, followed him into that test chamber, and paid the price when it went haywire. The Coalition called it an accident, but Toren knew better. He'd missed something, a flaw, a sabotage, and it haunted him. Not this time, Toren said to the empty cell. I'm not losing anyone else. Or myself. A low hum interrupted his thoughts. The wall shimmered, and a section slid open, revealing a Xylarian in a silver robe. Male, judging by the angular frame, with pearlescent skin and eyes like molten gold. His collar pulsed steadily, but there was a faint flicker like a glitch. Prisoner Valen, the Xylarian said, voice smooth as polished stone. I am Caliph, your overseer. You will face the High Council in 1 hour. Toren leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Caliph, huh? Nice name. Sounds like a guy who knows how to party. Tell me, what's the deal with this place? You guys always frame tourists, or am I special? Caliph's collar flickered again, but his face remained blank. Your humor is irrelevant. The council's judgment is absolute. Yeah, I'm getting that vibe. Toren stepped closer, studying the flicker. But let's talk shop. That explosion, too clean for a random hit. Someone knew exactly where to strike. You got any enemies around here? Rebels? Disgruntled engineers. You will not speak of such things, Caliph said, but his voice wavered, just a fraction. The queen maintains order. The collars ensure peace. Peace? Toren snorted. Looked more like a leash to me. Ever wonder what it's like to laugh, Caliph? Or cry? Bet you'd be a crier. Calith's collar flashed red, and he raised a hand, as if to summon guards. Then he paused, eyes narrowing. Your words are dangerous, human. They will not save you. Maybe not, Toren said, grinning. But they're all I've got right now. So what's the council like? Bunch of grumpy old robots. Or do they at least have snacks? Caliph ignored the jab, turning toward the door. Prepare yourself. The queen will decide your fate. Queen Mirae, right? Toren called after him. Heard she's a real charmer. Any tips on how to make a good impression? The door sealed shut, leaving Toren alone with his reflections. He sank to the floor, mind racing. The fake video, the collars, the explosion, it all pointed to a setup, but the pieces didn't fit. Not yet. He thought of Xylara's history, whispered in the engineers' barracks late at night. Centuries ago, they'd fought something called the Weeping War, a conflict fueled by unchecked emotions. Love, hate, grief, that nearly burned their world to ash. The collars were born from that ashes, a promise of stability. But stability at what cost? Toren's hand twitched, reaching for his vape, only to find empty pockets. Figures, he muttered. Take a guy's jacket, his boots, his only vice. What's next, my sparkling personality? He closed his eyes, picturing the spire's core, a lattice of crystal that sang when you touched it, like it was alive. He'd felt it during his work, a pulse that reminded him of Marcus's laugh, of Earth's messy, beautiful chaos. Xylara had buried that chaos, but Toren had a knack for digging things up. All right, Luminaris, he said, opening his eyes. You want a villain? I'll give you one hell of a show. The guards came for him sooner than expected. 4 of them, staffs at the ready, collars glowing like warning lights. Toren stood, stretching with exaggerated nonchalance. Miss me already? He asked, winking at the nearest guard. Don't tell me you're here to apologize. I'm not that forgiving. Move, the guard said, shoving him toward the door. Easy, big guy. I'm moving. But if we're going to the queen, can I get my vape back? Gotta make a good first impression. No response, just the hum of their staffs. Toren sighed, letting them march him through a corridor of glowing quartz. The walls sang faintly, a reminder of Xylara's power and its fragility. He'd seen the core schematics, knew how delicate the balance was. One wrong move, and the whole grid could collapse. They reached a massive gate, carved with patterns that shimmered like liquid light. Toren whistled, genuinely impressed. Okay, that's cool. You guys ever think about opening a theme park? Xylara, the emotion-free experience. I buy a ticket. The gate swung open, revealing a transport pod, a sleek, egg-shaped thing that hovered on a cushion of energy. The guards pushed him inside, and the pod shot forward, speeding through tunnels of crystal and shadow. Toren leaned back, hands behind his head. So, what's the queen like? He asked, glancing at the lead guard. I'm picturing tall, scary, maybe a fan of heavy metal. Am I close? The guard's collar pulsed, but he stayed silent. Toren grinned. You're killing me here. Throw me a bone. Is she at least fun at parties? The pod slowed, and the guards yanked him out into a cavernous chamber that made his jaw drop. Pillars of quartz stretched to a ceiling lost in light, and a platform floated at the center, surrounded by holographic screens. The High Council, he assumed, though he couldn't see them yet. Game face on, T, he muttered, straightening up. Time to meet the big shots. But before he could take another step, a guard raised his staff, and a bolt of energy slammed into Toren's chest. He gasped, the world tilting as pain seared through him. His knees hit the floor, and darkness rushed in, swallowing the light. Worst vacation ever, he managed before everything went black. The quartz cell pulsed with a soft, relentless glow, like a heartbeat trapped in crystal. Toren Valen sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at his own reflection in the curved walls. Without his jacket, boots, or vape, He felt naked in a way that had nothing to do with clothes. The air was too clean, too cold, stripping away the grit of the real world. Xylara's prison wasn't just a cage. It was a mirror, forcing you to face yourself. And Toren wasn't sure he liked the guy staring back. "All right, T," he muttered, running a hand through his messy hair. "You've been in worse spots. That bar fight on Titan? The reactor meltdown on Europa? Piece of cake compared to this." He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. The fake video, him supposedly planting a bomb at the Crystal Spire, gnawed at him. Someone had gone to a lot of trouble to pin this on him. The question was who and why. His thoughts drifted to the Spire's core, a lattice of living crystal he'd spent weeks studying. It wasn't just tech, it was art, singing with energy that felt almost human. He'd touched it once, felt it hum under his fingers, like it was whispering secrets. Secrets someone didn't want him uncovering. "Should have stayed on Earth," he said to no one. "At least there, the only explosions are bad dates." The wall shimmered, and Caliph appeared, his silver robe catching the light like liquid moonlight. The Xylarian's pearlescent skin gleamed, but his golden eyes flickered with something. Doubt, maybe, before his collar pulsed blue, steadying him. Toren stood, brushing off his pants with exaggerated nonchalance. "Caliph, my man," he said, flashing a grin that was pure Peter Quill charm. "Back for round 2? Gotta say, your hospitality's top-notch. 5 stars, but I'm docking a point for no complimentary snacks." Caliph's collar flickered, a glitch so brief Toren almost missed it. "Your levity is unproductive, human," the Xylarian said, voice smooth but edged. "The High Council waits. You will face judgment." "Judgment, huh? Sounds like a blast." Toren stepped closer, hands in his pockets. "But level with me, Caliph. That video they're waving around, it's fake, and you know it. Someone's pulling strings here. Got any guesses who?" Caliph's eyes narrowed, but his collar pulsed brighter, silencing any reply. "You will not speak a conspiracy. The Queen's will is absolute. Queen Mirae Voryn, right?" Toren tilted his head, Tony Stark's smirk creeping in. "Heard she's the big boss. So why is she letting a bunch of council goons call the shots? Doesn't sound very queenly." Caliph stiffened, his collar flashing red. "You know nothing of Xylara, human. The High Council serves the Queen, chosen by her to maintain order. Their authority is her will." Toren raised an eyebrow. "Chosen, huh? Funny, 'cause it sounds like they've got her on a leash. Those collars of yours, pretty fancy tech. Ever wonder who's really controlling them?" The Xylarian's hand twitched, as if reaching for a weapon, but he stopped. His collar flickered again, longer this time, and Toren caught a glimpse of something raw in his eyes. Anger, maybe grief before it vanished. "Enough," Caliph said, voice tight. "You will come with me. Now." Toren held up his hands, still grinning. "Lead the way, buddy. But if this is a trap, I'm going to be real disappointed. I thought we were bonding." Caliph turned, and the wall parted, revealing a corridor of glowing quartz that sang faintly, like a distant choir. 2 guards flanked Toren as they marched, their staffs humming with restrained power. He kept talking, partly to annoy them, partly to keep his own nerves in check. "So, Caliph," he said, matching the Xylarian stride. "What's your deal? You don't strike me as the mindless drone type. That flicker in your collar, bet it's got a story. Spill it. I'm a great listener." Caliph didn't look at him, but his shoulders tensed. "You speak too freely, human. It will not serve you before the council." "Maybe not, but it's keeping me sane." Toren glanced at the guards, lowering his voice. "Come on, man. Give me something. You're not like these guys. I can tell." Caliph's steps faltered just for a second. His collar pulsed erratically, and he spoke, barely above a whisper. "My mother, she was punished. For feeling. The council deemed her defective." Toren's grin faded. "Damn, that's rough. What happened to her?" Caliph's eyes darkened, but his collar flashed, cutting him off. "It does not matter. She is gone, and you will be silent." Toren nodded, filing the info away. Caliph wasn't just a cog in the machine. He was a crack in it, and cracks could be widened. The corridor opened into a transport chamber, where a sleek pod hovered, its surface rippling like liquid crystal. The guards shoved Toren inside, and the pod shot forward, speeding through tunnels that glowed with kaleidoscopic light. He leaned back, hands behind his head, ignoring the staffs pointed at him. "So, what's the council like?" he asked, glancing at Caliph, who stood rigid by the door. "I'm picturing a bunch of cranky accountants with bad haircuts. Or are they more evil overlord vibes?" Calith's collar pulsed, but he didn't answer. Toren kept going. "But they've got a guy named Bob. Every council's got a Bob. Probably the one who faked that video. Nice work, Bob. I'll say right before I punch him." The pod slowed, and the guards yanked Toren out, into a chamber that stole his breath. The Hall of Judgment was a cathedral of crystal, its ceiling a constellation of glowing shards that seemed to breathe. Pillars spiraled upward, etched with patterns that shifted like living runes. At the center, a floating platform held 7 figures, the High Council, cloaked in robes that shimmered like starlight. Their collars glowed brighter than any Toren had seen, pulsing in perfect sync. "Holy sci-fi blockbuster," Toren muttered, craning his neck. "You guys ever rent this place out for weddings?" "Silence," boomed a voice from the platform. The lead counselor, a Xylarian with sharp cheekbones and eyes like burning amber, stepped forward. His robe was edged in black, and his collar radiated authority. "I'm Archon Valthor, voice of order. You are Toren Valen, human, accused of sabotage." Toren spread his arms, grinning. "Guilty of being awesome, maybe. Sabotage? Nah, your video's got more holes than a cheap hollow flick." Valthor's collar pulsed, and a holographic screen flared to life, replaying the footage of Toren planting a device at the spire. The crowd of Xylarians watching from the chamber's edges, hundreds of them, collars glowing, murmured in unison, a sound like static. "Evidence is irrefutable," Valthor said. "You threaten the harmony of Xylara, forged after the Weeping War. Your kind, humans, bring chaos." Toren laughed, loud enough to echo. "Chaos? Buddy, I'm just here to fix your fancy light bulb. That video's fake, and you know it. I was rewiring conduits when the spire went kaboom. Check the logs. Or what? You too busy polishing your robes." A second counselor, a female with silver hair and a calculating gaze, leaned forward. "I'm Archon Silith, keeper of knowledge. Your defiance is noted but irrelevant. The Queen has decreed your punishment." "Queen Mirae," Toren's eyes lit up, scanning the platform. "Where is she? I was hoping for a royal meet and greet. Gotta say, I'm a fan of her work." The crowd's murmur grew sharper, collars flashing. Valthor raised a hand, silencing them. "You will not speak her name with such insolence. The Queen's will is manifest through us." Toren crossed his arms, smirk unwavering. "Manifest, huh? Sounds like she's got you running errands. What's the deal? She on vacation? Or does she just not trust you to screw this up?" Silith's collar pulsed, and she gestured. The hologram shifted, showing schematics of the spire's core, overlaid with red alerts. "Your actions destabilized our energy grid," she said. "The core falters. Without it, Xylara falls." "Lady, I'm a guy trying to save your core," Toren shot back. "I've been neck-deep in your crystal voodoo for weeks. If I wanted to blow it up, I'd have done a better job." Valthor's eyes narrowed. "Your lies will not sway us. You will undergo the ritual of purification, administered by the Queen herself. It will cleanse your chaos or destroy you." Toren's grin didn't falter, but his stomach twisted. "Purification? Sounds like a spa day gone wrong. Any chance I get a lawyer? Or at least a coffee?" The council ignored him, their collars pulsing in unison. The platform glowed, and a figure appeared at its edge, descending in a cascade of light. Mirae Voryn, High Queen of Xylara, was a vision that stopped Toren's breath. Her skin shimmered like polished jade, her black hair flowing like a nebula, catching the light in waves. Her silver armor hugged her form, accentuating every curve, and her golden eyes burned with a fire that was both cold and alive. Her collar, unlike the others, was nearly invisible, a thin band that pulsed faintly, as if struggling to contain her. "Holy hell," Toren whispered, forgetting his bravado for a split second. "That's not what I expected." Mirae's gaze locked onto him, piercing, unyielding. Her voice was velvet over steel, resonating through the chamber. Toren Valen, you stand accused of shattering our peace. What do you say in your defense? Toren snapped back to himself, flashing his best Starquill grin. Your Majesty, I'm flattered by the attention, but you've got the wrong guy. That video's a fake, and I'm betting someone up there knows it. He jerked a thumb at Valthor. Maybe ask Bob over here. He's got shifty eyes. The crowd gasped, collars flashing red. Valthor's face tightened, but Mirae raised a hand, silencing the chamber. She stepped closer, her armor glinting, and Toren felt the air shift, heavy with something he couldn't name. She stopped a foot away, studying him like a puzzle she hadn't expected to solve. You speak boldly for one so fragile, she said, her voice low, almost curious. Do you not fear death? Toren met her gaze, unflinching. Death? Nah. Bad scripts? Now that's scary. And this setup's got bad script written all over it. Mirae's eyes flickered, just for a moment, and Toren caught it, a crack in her royal mask. She turned to a guard, gesturing. Bring him forward. I will examine him before the ritual. The guard hesitated, collar pulsing, but obeyed. Toren stepped onto a smaller platform, raised to meet Mirae's level. She reached out, her fingers brushing his shoulder through his thin shirt. The touch was light, but it sent a jolt through him, like a spark jumping circuits. Her skin was warm, impossibly smooth, and for a second, her breath hitched, her collar flickering like Calith's. Toren's pulse raced, but he kept his grin. Careful, Your Majesty, he said, voice low, teasing. You might catch something, like a sense of humor. Mirae's hand lingered, her golden eyes searching his. Then she pulled back, her collar pulsing brighter, as if reasserting control. You are unusual, she said, almost to herself. She turned to Valthor, voice firm. Prepare the ritual of purification. This human will be cleansed. Toren's grin widened, masking the chill down his spine. Cleansed? Hope it comes with a happy ending. I'm partial to massages. Valthor's collar flared, and he gestured to the guards. Take him. As they dragged Toren away, he glanced back at Mirae. Her eyes followed him, unreadable but intense, like a storm waiting to break. The platform descended, and the chamber faded into light, but Toren's mind was racing. That touch, that flicker, something was off. Mirae wasn't just a queen. She was a player in a game he didn't yet understand. Hey, Caliph, he called as the guards shoved him into a pod. Tell the queen I'm free for dinner. Her treat. The pod's door slammed shut, and Toren leaned back, heart pounding. He'd seen cracks before. In machines, in people, in himself. Xylara was full of them, and he was damn good at breaking things wide open. The transport pod hummed through Xylara's crystal veins, a bullet of light slicing through tunnels that shimmered like frozen auroras. Toren Valen leaned back against the pod's smooth wall, hands stuffed in the pockets of his borrowed gray pants, trying to look like he wasn't about to face a cosmic brainwashing session. The two guards flanking him gripped their staffs tighter, their collars pulsing red, as if his very presence was an error their systems couldn't process. Gotta say, fellas, Toren said, flashing a grin that was half Tony Stark swagger, half Peter Quill mischief, you're terrible tour guides. Not one fun fact about this place. Like, what's with all the sparkly rocks? You guys mind these yourselves? Or is there a crystal fairy I should thank? The guards didn't blink, their golden eyes fixed ahead. Toren sighed, rolling his shoulders. Tough crowd. Bet you're a riot at parties. His mind churned, replaying the Hall of Judgment. Queen Mirae Voryn, her voice, her eyes, that fleeting touch on his shoulder, had thrown him off balance. Not because she was a queen, or even because she was drop-dead gorgeous in a way that made his brain short-circuit. No, it was that flicker in her collar, the crack in her royal facade. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was a puzzle, and Toren had always been lousy at leaving puzzles unsolved. The pod slowed, and the guards yanked him out into a corridor that felt alive. The walls were quartz, but not the cold, sterile kind of cell. These sang, a low, resonant hum that vibrated in his chest, like the core he'd worked on weeks ago. He'd felt it then, a pulse that wasn't just energy, but something deeper, almost human. Now it was louder, urging him forward. "All right, Xylara," he muttered. "What's your game?" The corridor opened into a chamber that stole his breath. The ritual sanctum was a cathedral of light, its domed ceiling a mosaic of crystal shards that fractured the air into rainbows. At the center stood a raised platform, a slab of translucent quartz etched with runes that glowed like trapped stars. Above it, a lattice of crystal tendrils hung, pulsing with energy that rippled like water. The air smelled of ozone and something sweeter, like flowers blooming in a storm. Toren whistled, genuinely impressed. "Okay, this is next level. You guys ever consider a side hustle in interior design?" "Silence, human," one guard snapped, shoving him toward the platform. The other strapped him down, securing his wrists and ankles with bands of liquid light that tightened like a second skin. His gray shirt was thin, clinging to his frame, and the cool quartz against his back sent a shiver through him. "Hey, easy with the bondage," Toren said, winking at the guard. "At least buy me dinner first." The guard's collar flashed, but he stepped back, joining the other at the chamber's edge. Toren tested the restraints, muscles flexing, but they didn't budge. He was exposed, vulnerable, and for the first time since the explosion, a flicker of doubt crept in. The ritual of purification, whatever it was, didn't sound like a friendly chat. "Focus, T," he muttered, closing his eyes. He thought of Marcus, his old partner, laughing over a busted reactor back on Earth. "You're too cocky, T," Marcus had said. "One day it'll bite you." Maybe today was that day. But Toren hadn't survived this long by folding. He'd find a way out, or through. The chamber's hum grew louder, and the crystal tendrils above pulsed, casting waves of light across his skin. A door of quartz slid open, and Mirae Voryn entered alone. She was no longer in her silver armor, but a flowing gown of gossamer threads, so thin it seemed woven from starlight. It hugged her curves, her waist, her hips, the graceful slope of her shoulders, revealing the pearlescent sheen of her green skin. Her black hair cascaded like a midnight river, catching the light in iridescent waves, and her golden eyes burned with a quiet intensity. Her collar, that delicate band, pulsed faintly, almost invisible against her throat. Toren's breath caught, and for a moment, his usual quips failed him. "Well, damn," he managed, voice low. "You clean up nice, your majesty." Mirae's gaze flicked to him, unreadable but sharp, like a blade testing its edge. "Your words are a shield, Toren Valen," she said, her voice a melody of power and restraint. "They will not protect you here." "Maybe not," Toren said, recovering his grin, "but they're keeping things lively. So what's this ritual? You gonna zap me into a model citizen? Or is it more of a sing-along vibe?" She stepped onto the platform, her bare feet silent against the quartz. The tendrils above stirred, their light intensifying, bathing her in a halo that made her look both divine and dangerous. "The ritual of purification," she said, "will purge your chaos. Your thoughts, your emotions. They are a poison to Xylara." Toren raised an eyebrow. "Poison? Lady, I'm more like a spice. Add a little me, and your world gets a lot more interesting." Mirae's lips twitched, the barest hint of a reaction, but her collar pulsed, and her face hardened. "You do not understand what you threaten. The weeping war consumed us because of such chaos. The collar saved us. I will not let you unravel that." "Weeping war, huh?" Toren tilted his head, curious despite himself. "Sounds like a hell of a story. Care to share? I'm all ears." She ignored him, raising a hand. The tendrils hummed louder, and energy crackled, forming a web of light that connected her to the platform. Toren's restraints tightened, and he felt a pressure in his skull, like fingers brushing his thoughts. He gritted his teeth, forcing a smirk. "Whoa, getting personal already," he said, voice strained. "At least take me to dinner first." Mirae stepped closer, her gown shimmering as she moved. She placed her hand on his chest, fingers splaying over his heart. Her touch was warm, electric, and Toren's pulse jumped, not just from the ritual. She leaned in, her face inches from his, and her fingers slid upward, brushing the base of his throat. The contact sent a jolt through him, like lightning kissing his veins, and he felt her pulse quicken under his skin, a mirror to his own. "Easy, your majesty," Toren murmured, his voice low, teasing despite the pressure in his head. "You're going to give me ideas." Mirae's golden eyes widened, and her collar flickered, a chaotic dance of blue and red. Her fingers lingered on his throat, tracing the line of his pulse, and for a moment, her breath hitched, her skin glowing brighter, as if lit from within. "What are you?" she whispered, almost to herself. Before Toren could answer, the energy surged and the world dissolved. His mind opened, raw and unguarded, and he was no longer in the chamber. He saw flashes. Mirae, younger, standing in a garden of glowing flowers, her laughter free, unburdened. A Xylarian man with kind eyes held her hand, his collar absent, his voice a song of love. They danced under a sky of falling light, their joy a defiance of the world. Then darkness, guards, screams, the man torn away, Mirae's cries silenced by a needle's sting. Her memories were erased, her heart locked behind a wall of crystal and code. Toren gasped, back in the chamber, his chest heaving. Mirae staggered, her hand still on his throat, her eyes wild. He'd seen her pain, but she'd seen his, Marcus's laugh, the reactor's failure, the guilt that burned hotter than any star. The tendrils above screamed, their light fracturing, and the platform shook, runes flaring like warning signs. "You're tearing me apart," Mirae whispered, her voice raw, trembling. Her collar sparked, fighting to contain her, but her eyes were alive, burning with something new. Fear, wonder, hunger. "Don't stop." Toren's head spun, but he forced a grin, voice hoarse. "Told you I'm a spice, not a poison. Feels like you're the one getting purified here." The chamber's doors burst open, and Archon Valthor stormed in, his black-edged robe billowing. His collar blazed, and behind him, Archon Silith followed, her silver hair glinting. "Enough!" Valthor roared, gesturing at the tendrils, which dimmed instantly. "This ritual is compromised." Mirae pulled back, her hand shaking, her collar pulsing erratically. She turned to Valthor, voice steady but strained. "The human, he is not what we expected. The ritual must continue." "Continue?" Silith's voice was cold, analytical. "The lattice is unstable. His presence disrupts the collars. Ours, the guards, even yours, my queen. He is a virus." Toren laughed, weak but defiant. "Virus? That's a new one. Usually I get nuisance or pain in the ass. You guys need a better PR team." Valthor's eyes narrowed. "You mock us, human, but you cannot deny the evidence. The spires collapse, the chaos you bring. It threatens all we have built." "Evidence?" Toren tugged at his restraints, smirking. "Your fake videos got nothing on me. I'm betting you know exactly who blew that spire. Care to share? Or are you too busy playing bad cop?" Mirae raised a hand, silencing Valthor before he could respond. "Enough," she said, her voice regaining its steel. "The ritual will proceed tomorrow. Until then, return him to his cell." Toren raised an eyebrow. "Tomorrow? So what, we're on a cliffhanger? Gotta say, I'm hooked. What's next, a plot twist?" The guards unstrapped him, yanking him to his feet. He stumbled, still dizzy, but caught Mirae's gaze as they dragged him away. Her eyes held his, a storm of questions, and something else, something that made his chest tighten. Her collar flickered, and for a split second, he saw her, not the queen, but the woman in the garden, laughing under a sky of light. "Hey, Mirae," he called, grinning as the guard shoved him toward the door. "Save me a dance, yeah?" The doors sealed shut, and the chamber's hum faded, replaced by the pod's drone as they hauled him back to his cell. Toren slumped against the wall, heart pounding. That ritual hadn't purified him. It had cracked something open, in him and in her. He'd seen her pain, her love, her loss. And she'd seen his. Marcus's face flashed in his mind, but so did Mirae's, and for the first time, he wondered if he was in over his head. "All right, T," he muttered, closing his eyes. "You wanted to poke the beast. Now what?" In a shadowed chamber far above, Valthor and Silith stood before a holographic map of Xylara's energy grid. Red alerts pulsed where the spire had fallen, and smaller warnings flared across the city. Collars malfunctioning, guards hesitating, citizens whispering of the human. "He is no ordinary threat," Silith said, her voice low. The lattice reacted to him, amplifying his essence. It spread to her. Valthor's collar blazed. The queen must remain pure. If she falters, the grid falters. We cannot allow a human to unravel centuries of order. Silith's eyes gleamed, calculating. Then we must act. The ritual must not fail again. If it does, we eliminate him. Valthor nodded, his face a mask of resolve. For Xylara, for the queen. But as they spoke, a faint hum echoed through the chamber, a song from the crystal lattice itself, carrying a whisper of chaos and hope. The court cell was a prison of light, its walls reflecting Toren Valen's every move like 1,000 judgmental eyes. He paced, barefoot, his gray shirt rumpled from restless sleep, or what passed for sleep in a place that never dimmed. The ritual of purification had left him rattled, not because it hurt, but because it worked in all the wrong ways. Mirae's memories, her laughter, her loss, clung to him like smoke. And his own ghosts, Marcus's grin, the reactor's roar, had spilled into her mind, too. They'd seen each other, raw and unfiltered, and Toren wasn't sure what scared him more, that connection, or what it might mean. "All right, T," he muttered, running a hand through his messy hair. "You poked the queen-sized hornet's nest. Now what?" He stopped pacing, leaning against the wall. The crystal hummed faintly, a reminder of Xylara's pulse. The ritual wasn't just tech, it was a bridge, linking minds in ways the High Council hadn't planned. Mirae's collar had flickered, just like Calith's, and Toren was starting to think those glitches weren't accidents. Someone, or something, was fighting back against the system, and he was caught in the middle. "Typical," he said, smirking to himself. "Go fix a power grid. End up sparking a revolution. You got a real knack for trouble, Valen." The wall shimmered, and Calith stepped through, his silver robe catching the light like a frozen wave. The Xylarian's pearlescent skin glowed, but his golden eyes were shadowed, his collar pulsing erratically. Toren straightened, flashing a grin that was pure Peter Quill charm. "Calith, my favorite jailer," he said, spreading his arms. "Back for more sparkling conversation? Or did you just miss my face?" Calith's collar flickered, and he glanced at the guards outside before speaking, voice low. "Your words are reckless, human. The council watches you closely now. The ritual, it was not as intended." "No kidding," Toren said, stepping closer, his Tony Stark smirk creeping in. "Felt more like a therapy session gone wild. Me and the queen swapping sob stories? Not on my bingo card." Calith's eyes narrowed, but his collar pulsed, silencing any retort. "You do not understand the danger," he said. "The lattice reacted to you. It destabilized her collar and others. The council calls you a virus." Toren laughed, leaning against the wall. "Virus? That's a promotion from nuisance. But let's cut the crap, Calith. You're not here to lecture me. That flicker in your collar. You're curious. Spill it. What's really going on?" Calith hesitated, his hand twitching. His collar sparked, but he spoke, voice barely a whisper. "There are others. Those who resist the collars. They call themselves the Echoes. They live below, in the forgotten veins of Luminaris, where the crystals no longer sing." Toren's grin faded, his mind racing. "Echoes, huh? Sounds like my kind of crowd. Rebels, artists, troublemakers? But they'd love my stories about earth bars and bad decisions." "They're dangerous," Calith said, but his tone lacked conviction. "They hoard relics, songs, paintings from before the Weeping War. The council hunts them. If you're seen as their ally, then I'm already screwed." Toren cut in, eyes gleaming. "Might as well make it count. Get me to the queen, Calith. Tell her it's about the ritual. I need to check something. Science stuff." Calith's collar pulsed red, and he stepped back. "You ask too much. The queen is unwell. The ritual has shaken her." "Shaken her?" Toren's smirk returned. "Good. Means she's human? Well, close enough. Come on, man, help a guy out. You want answers too, don't you? Calitha's gaze darted to the door, then back to Toren. His collar flickered longer, a silent battle, and then he nodded, almost imperceptibly. I will arrange it, but if you betray me, human, I will end you myself. Deal, Toren said, winking. But fair warning, I'm hard to kill. Ask my last boss. Caliph turned, the wall sealing behind him. Toren sank to the floor, heart pounding. The echoes, rebels hiding in Xylara's underbelly, were a wild card, but they were his kind of wild card. If he could reach them, maybe he could turn this mess into something bigger, something worth fighting for. High above Luminaris, in a chamber of polished obsidian, Mirae Voryn stood before a mirror of liquid crystal. Her reflection wavered, not just from the mirror's tech, but from the storm inside her. She wore a simple robe, white as starlight, its fabric clinging to her curves, but it felt like a lie, a costume for a queen who no longer fit her crown. Her fingers brushed her throat, where her collar pulsed faintly, its rhythm off, like a heart skipping beats. She closed her eyes, and Toren's face flashed in her mind, his grin, his defiance, the way his pulse had raced under her touch. The ritual should have cleansed him, stripped his chaos bare. Instead, it had poured into her a flood of laughter, pain, guilt. She saw his friend, Marcus, burning in a reactor's failure, and felt Toren's shame as if it were her own. Worse, he'd seen her, laughing in a garden, loving a man whose name was now ash, erased by the council to keep her pure. "Who are you?" she whispered, fingers tightening on her collar. It sparked a sharp sting that made her flinch, but it couldn't silence the ache. For centuries, she'd ruled Xylara, her emotions locked away, her will bound to the grid. The collars ensured order, a lesson carved from the Weeping War's ashes. But Toren's chaos was a song she couldn't unhear, and it terrified her as much as it called to her. A chime broke her thoughts, and the mirror shifted, revealing Archon Silith's face. "My queen," Silith said, her silver hair glinting. "The human destabilizes the lattice. His influence spreads. We must act." Mirae's collar pulsed, urging compliance, but she straightened, voice cold. "The ritual will continue. He is unique. We cannot destroy what we do not understand." Silith's eyes narrowed. "Understanding is a luxury we cannot afford." The grid falters. "If you falter with it." "I do not falter," Mirae snapped, her collar sparking. "Prepare the lattice for tomorrow. That is my command." Silith bowed, but her gaze lingered, calculating. The mirror darkened, and Mirae turned away, her reflection fracturing. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart race, a traitor to her crown. Toren's voice echoed, "Spice, not poison," and she wondered for the first time if he was right. Hours later, Toren followed Caliph through a hidden passage, its walls rough, unpolished quartz that barely glowed. The guards had been dismissed, a risk Caliph took with gritted teeth. Toren kept his tone light, masking the adrenaline pumping through him. "So, Caliph," he said, clapping the Xylarian's shoulder, "this secret tunnel thing. You do this often? Got a side hustle, sneaking rebels around?" Caliph's collar flickered, and he shrugged off Toren's hand. "Speak softly, human. We are not safe here." "Safe? Man, I haven't been safe since I landed on this glitter rock." Toren grinned, but his eyes scanned the passage, noting faint carvings, swirls, faces, forbidden art from a Xylara long gone. "These echoes of yours, they're keeping the old stuff alive, aren't they? Songs, stories, the works?" Caliph's voice was tight. "They preserve what the council erased. Music, love, things that broke us once. They believe it can save us." Toren nodded, filing it away. "Sounds like my kind of party. Gotta meet these guys." The passage ended at a gate of woven crystal, its strands pulsing faintly. Caliph pressed a hand to it, and it parted, revealing a garden that stopped Toren in his tracks. The Forbidden Grove was a riot of light and shadow, its trees sculpted from quartz that wept glowing sap. Flowers of liquid crystal bloomed, their petals humming softly, and a stream of molten light wound through the earth, casting rainbows across the air. It was alive, defiant, a secret Xylara had buried. "Holy hell," Toren said, whistling. "You've been hiding this?" "I'm moving in." Calith's collar pulsed, and he gestured ahead. "The queen waits. Do not test her patience." Toren followed, his boots silent on the glowing moss. Mirae stood by the stream, her white robe shimmering, her black hair loose, catching the light like a nebula. She turned as they approached, her golden eyes sharp but haunted, her collar flickering like a dying star. "Toren Valen," she said, voice low, wary. "You requested this meeting. Speak." Toren glanced at Calith, who nodded and stepped back, leaving them alone. He took a step closer, hands in his pockets, his grin easy but his eyes sharp. "Your Majesty, gotta say this place is a vibe. Beats my cell by a mile. You come here to think, or just to get away from Bob and his grumpy council pals?" Mirae's lips twitched, but her collar pulsed, steadying her. "You speak of Archon Valthor with such disrespect. He serves Xylara, as I do." "Serves?" Toren snorted, stepping closer still. "Guy's got control freak written all over him. And that collar of yours, it's not like the others, is it? But it's got a few extra tricks, courtesy of the council." Her hand flew to her throat, fingers brushing the collar. It sparked, and she flinched, eyes narrowing. "You know nothing of my burden. The ritual exposed you, human, your pain, your guilt. Why should I trust you?" Toren's grin softened, just a fraction. "Because I saw you too, Mirae. That garden, that guy you loved. They took him from you, didn't they? Locked him away to keep you in line." Her breath caught, and her collar flared, but she didn't retreat. "You saw too much," she whispered. "The council protects Xylara. My sacrifice ensures order." "Order?" Toren's voice dropped, earnest now. "That's not a life. It's a cage, and you're not the only one trapped. Calith, the echoes, they're all fighting it, same as you." Mirae's eyes searched his, and for a moment, the queen was gone, replaced by a woman caught between duty and desire. Toren stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of her, the faint hum of her collar. His hand moved, almost on instinct, brushing her waist through the thin robe. The touch was light, but it sent a wave of heat through them both, like a current sparking to life. Her skin glowed brighter, and she trembled, her breath uneven. "You're not a queen here," Toren said, voice low, steady. "You're just Mirae." Her eyes widened, and her hand gripped his wrist, not pushing him away but holding him there, as if anchoring herself. The air thickened, charged, and for a heartbeat, they were alone in the universe, the stream's light dancing across their faces. Then her collar blazed red, a sharp pulse that made her gasp and step back, breaking the moment. "I cannot," she said, voice shaking. "This is forbidden." Toren's hand fell, but his eyes held hers, full of promise. "I'll wait," he said, his grin returning, softer now. "But not forever." Calith appeared, collar pulsing, urgency in his stance. "We must go. The council's drones are near." Mirae nodded, turning away, her robe trailing light. "Return tomorrow," she said, not looking at Toren. "The ritual will be adjusted." Toren followed Calith back to the passage, his mind racing. That touch, her tremble, it wasn't just chemistry. It was a crack in Xylara's armor, and he was damn good at breaking things. The echoes, the garden Mirae, they were pieces of a puzzle, and he was starting to see the picture. "Hey, Calith," he said as they reached the cell. "You ever hear a song that makes you feel alive?" Calith's collar flickered, and he paused. "Once," he said, voice distant. "Before my mother was taken." Toren nodded, stepping into the cell. "Keep that song, man. It's worth fighting for." The walls sealed shut, and Toren sank to the floor. Mirae's face burned into his mind. He wasn't just a prisoner anymore. He was a spark, and Xylara was dry tinder, waiting to burn. Luminaris pulsed under a violet sky, its crystal spires catching the dawn in a symphony of rainbows. But beneath the surface, cracks were spreading, not just in the quartz, but in the hearts of its people. Toren Valen stood at the edge of his cell, the quartz walls no longer a cage, but a stage. The ritual of purification had failed to break him. Instead, it had ignited something, a spark that Mirae Voryn, High Queen of Xylara, couldn't extinguish. And now, Toren was ready to fan it into a flame. "All right, Xylara," he muttered, running a hand through his messy hair. "Time to turn up the volume." The wall shimmered, and Caliph stepped through, his silver robe rumpled, his collar flickering like a dying bulb. The Xylarian's pearlescent skin was taut, his golden eyes darting to the shadows. Toren flashed a grin, all Peter Quill swagger, and clapped his hands. "Caliph, my man," he said. "You look like you just ran from a council meeting. What's the word? We staging a jailbreak? Or is it tacos for lunch?" Caliph's collar pulsed, but his voice was urgent, low. "The Queen has acted, human. She has declared you absolved. You are to be named Ambassador of Light, a role of her creation." Toren's grin faltered, then widened, Tony Stark's smirk creeping in. "Ambassador? Damn, I'm moving up in the world. Does it come with a corner office? A shiny badge? Tell me there's a badge." Caliph ignored the jab, stepping closer. "This is Neuest. The council is furious. They suspect our motives, your motives. You must tread carefully." "Careful's not my style," Toren said, leaning against the wall. "But I'm listening. What's Mirae playing at? She doesn't strike me as the let the human roam free type." Caliph's collar flickered longer, and he lowered his voice to a whisper. "The ritual changed her. She speaks of balance, of understanding your chaos. But the council watches. Archon Valthor demands your execution." Toren whistled, unfazed. "Valthor's got a real hard-on for me. Huh? Bet he's fun at karaoke. So what's the catch with this ambassador gig?" "You will advise the Queen," Caliph said, "and assemble a team. Representatives from the minor clans. She insists it is to study your ways, but I suspect she seeks allies." Toren's eyes gleamed. "Allies, huh? I like where this is going. Give me that team, Caliph. And make it quick. We got a show to put on." Caliph hesitated, his collar sparking, but he nodded. "I will arrange it. But know this, human. If you betray her, I will not hesitate." "Relax, buddy," Toren said, winking. "I'm more of a save-the-day guy than a backstabber. Now let's move. I've got a revolution to start." The chamber they gave him wasn't a cell, but a suite, its walls of polished quartz etched with patterns that shifted like dreams. A new jacket waited, black, tailored, not unlike his old one, and boots that fit like they'd been made for him. Toren slipped them on, missing his vape, but feeling a spark of his old self return. He stood before a crystal window, gazing at Luminaris's spires, their light fractured by the dawn. "Nice view," he muttered, "but I'm not here for sightseeing." Caliph returned with two Xylarians, both women, their collars dimmer than most. The first, Silva, was a warrior, her frame lean and scarred, her green skin marked with faint silver lines from battles past. Her eyes burned with defiance, and her collar flickered, as if struggling to contain her. The second, Lyrian, was a scientist, her silver hair braided tightly, her gaze sharp and curious. Her collar was steady, but her fingers twitched, betraying a mind that never stopped. "Ladies," Toren said, spreading his arms, "welcome to Team Chaos. I'm Toren, your resident human troublemaker. Who's ready to shake things up?" Silva crossed her arms, her collar pulsing. "I am here by the Queen's command, human. Do not mistake this for trust. My clan suffered for defying order. I will not repeat their error." Toren raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Fair enough, Silva. But let me guess, you got in trouble for caring too much, didn't you? Saved someone you shouldn't have." Her eyes widened, and her collar sparked. "How did you?" "Lucky guess," Toren cut in, grinning. "Stick with me, and we'll save a few more." "What about you, Lyrian? What's your deal?" Lyrian's gaze was cool, analytical. "I study the lattice, the crystal grid that powers Xylara. The collars, they harm us, shorten our lives. I seek to understand why." Toren whistled, impressed. "Damn, you my kind of nerd. All right, here's the plan. We're going to teach Xylara how to feel again. Laughter, tears, the works. Think you can handle that?" Silva snorted. "You speak of madness. Emotions destroyed us in the Weeping War." "Maybe," Toren said, his voice softening. "But they also make life worth living. Trust me, I've got scars to prove it. Lyrian tilted her head, curious. What do you propose, Ambassador? Toren's grin turned wicked. We're putting on a show. A broadcast, straight to every collar in Luminaris. Call it Toren's Light. Time to wake this place up. The broadcast chamber was a marvel, a sphere of crystal panels that hummed with latent power. Toren stood at its center, Silva and Lyrian at his sides, while Caliph worked the controls, his collar flickering with every command. Mirae had granted them access, a risky move that made Toren wonder just how far she was willing to go. He adjusted his jacket, feeling the weight of what was coming. "All right, team," he said, clapping his hands. "This is it. We're not just talking to Luminaris. We're talking to every Xylarian who's ever wondered what it's like to feel. No pressure." Silva gripped her staff, uneasy. "If this fails, human, the council will crush us." "Then we don't fail," Toren said, winking. "Lyrian, you got the lattice patched in?" She nodded, her fingers dancing over a crystal console. "The signal will reach every collar, but the council will detect it. We have minutes at most." "Good enough," Toren said. He stepped to the chamber's focal point, where a beam of light waited to carry his voice. Caliph hit it. The Xylarian hesitated, his collar sparking, then pressed a rune. The panels flared, and Toren felt the lattices hum, like a heartbeat syncing with his own. He took a breath, channeling every barroom storyteller he'd ever been, and spoke. "Hey, Xylara," he said, his voice warm, teasing. "Toren Valen here, your friendly neighborhood human. You don't know me, but you know this. Your collars are lying to you. They say emotions are chaos, that they'll break you. But let me tell you a story, a true one from Earth." He paused, letting the silence build. There was a guy, a nobody, who loved a girl more than stars. She was fire, he was dust, but together they burned bright. Then she got sick, real sick, and he couldn't save her. He tried, broke every rule, lost everything. And when she was gone, he didn't just feel pain. He felt her love, still there, keeping him alive. That's what emotions do. They hurt, sure, but they make you you. The panels pulsed, carrying his words to the city. In the streets, Xylarians stopped, their collars flickering as Toren's voice wove through them. He kept going, his grin fading, his voice raw. "I've seen your queen," he said. "She's strong, but she's trapped, same as you. Those collars? They're not saving you. They're stealing you. So listen to me, Xylara. Laugh, cry, scream, be alive. Because if you don't, you're already gone." Silva's collar sparked, and she gripped her staff tighter, eyes wet. Lyrian's fingers froze on the console, her breath uneven. Caliph stared at Toren, his collar a chaotic dance of light. And in the streets, something shifted. A Xylarian woman tore her collar off, her face crumpling as she sobbed. A man followed, then another, their voices rising in a chorus of pain and joy. "Holy shit," Toren whispered, watching the feed. "It's working." Lyrian's voice was sharp. "The council's responding. Drones are coming." Toren nodded, stepping back. "Time to move. Caliph, get us out of here." But before they could, the chamber shook and a hologram flared. Archon Valthor, his face a mask of rage. "Human," he roared. "You are a plague. The Queen's mercy ends now." Toren grinned, unfazed. "Valthor, buddy, you sound stressed. Try yoga. I hear it's great for control freaks." Valthor's collar blazed, and the hologram vanished. Alarm screamed, and Caliph yanked Toren toward a side passage. "The echoes will meet us below," he said, voice tight. "But the council has taken me. They know I helped you." Toren's grin faded. "Caliph, you." "Go," Caliph snapped, shoving him forward. "Save her. Save us." Silva and Lyrian followed, their collars dimming as they ran. Toren glanced back, heart heavy but kept moving. The city was waking, and he wasn't about to let it sleep again. In the Forbidden Grove, Mirae stood by the stream, her white robe glowing under the quartz trees. Her collar flickered, weaker now, as Toren's voice echoed from a hidden crystal. She closed her eyes, his story of love and loss washing over her, stirring memories she'd buried. The council's codes tightened her collar, urging control, but she felt it, a crack, widening with every word. She pressed a hand to her chest, whispering, "Toren, what have you done?" Above, Luminaris burned with light, not from fire but from its people. In the squares, Xylarians sang, their collars cast aside, their voices weaving a new song. The luminous rite, a ritual of freedom born from Toren's spark. And in the shadows, the echoes moved, ready to fight for a world that could feel again. Luminaris burned with a light it hadn't known in centuries. Not the cold glow of its crystal spires, but the warm, chaotic blaze of its people. In the streets, Xylarians sang, their collars shattered, their voices weaving the luminous rite into a tapestry of defiance. The echoes, once shadows in the city's veins, now fought openly, their makeshift weapons clashing with council drones. Toren's broadcast, Toren's light, had cracked Xylara's foundation, and the High Council was scrambling to hold the pieces together. Toren Valen ran through a tunnel of rough quartz, Silva and Lyrian at his heels, their breaths ragged. The air was thick with ozone and the faint hum of the crystal lattice. A pulse that felt like Xylara itself was waking. Toren's new jacket was torn, his boots scuffed, but his grin was intact, a mix of Tony Stark's swagger and Peter Quill's reckless charm. "Gotta hand it to you, ladies," he panted, dodging a falling shard. "You throw one hell of a revolution. Remind me to buy you drinks when this is over." Silva, her warrior's frame taut, gripped her staff, its tip glowing with stolen energy. Her collar was gone, her green skin marked with sweat and silver scars. "Save your jests, human," she snapped, but her eyes gleamed with fire. "The Council's forces are closing. We must reach the crystal spire." Lyrian, her silver braid fraying, clutched a crystal tablet, its screen flashing red. "The lattice is unstable," she said, voice sharp. "If we don't secure the core, Luminaris falls, revolution or not." Toren nodded, his grin sharpening. "Then we hit the spire, broadcast one last hurrah, and shut Valthor up for good. Easy, right?" Silva snorted. "You are insufferable." "And you love it," Toren shot back, winking. "Let's move." They emerged into a plaza of shattered quartz, where the crystal spire loomed, its peak scarred from the first explosion. Drones swarmed like angry stars, their beams cutting through the air. Xylarians fought back, some with weapons, others with bare hands, their faces alive with rage and joy. Toren's chest tightened. This was his doing, for better or worse. "All right, team," he said, ducking behind a fallen pillar. "Silva, you're on drone duty. Lyrian, get that tablet ready to hack the lattice. I'm heading for the core." Silva's eyes narrowed. "And the Queen?" Toren's grin faltered, just for a second. "She'll be there. Trust me." They split, Silva charging into the fray, her staff a blur of light. Lyrian crouched, her fingers flying over the tablet, muttering equations like prayers. Toren sprinted for the spire's base, dodging beams, his heart pounding with more than adrenaline. Mirae was the key, not just to the fight, but to him. That ritual, that garden, her touch, they'd changed him, and he wasn't running from it anymore. Inside, the spire was a cathedral of chaos, its corridors fractured, its lattice singing a discordant song. Toren reached the core chamber, a vast sphere where the crystal heart pulsed, its light flickering like a dying star. Mirae stood at its center, her white robe torn, her black hair wild. Her collar sparked, but her golden eyes burned with resolve. "Toren," she said, voice steady despite the chaos. "You should not be here." He flashed a grin, stepping closer. "Yeah, well, I'm bad at following orders. You okay?" Her collar flared, and she winced but nodded. "The Council seeks to lock the lattice, reinforce the collars. I cannot let them." "Then we end this," Toren said, his voice softening. "Together." Before she could answer, the chamber shook, and Archon Valthor appeared, flanked by drones. His black-edged robe billowed, his collar blazing like a furnace. "Human," he roared, "you have poisoned her, poisoned Xylara. You will die for this." Toren raised his hands, smirking. "Valthor, buddy, you're sounding repetitive. Got a new script, or you just love the sound of your own voice? Valthor's collar pulsed, and the drones fired. Toren dove, pulling Mirae behind a crystal strut. The beams scorched the air, and the lattice screamed, its light fracturing. Mirae gripped his arm, her touch electric even now. We must reach the core, she said, breathless. I can override it, free the collars. Toren nodded, peeking out. Silva and Lyrian are handling the outside. We just need a distraction. She met his eyes, a spark passing between them. Then give them one. He grinned, pure cool mischief. My specialty. Toren leaped out, dodging beams, and shouted, Hey, Valthor, your drones suck. Bet I could build better ones with a screwdriver and some duct tape. Valthor's rage was a living thing, his collar blazing as he redirected the drones. Mirae slipped past, reaching the core, her hands glowing as she interfaced with the lattice. Toren kept moving, taunting, drawing fire, until a beam grazed his shoulder, searing through his jacket. He grunted, stumbling, but kept his grin. Nice shot, he called, still not impressed. The chamber shook again, and Silva burst in, her staff shattering a drone. Lyrian followed, her tablet linked to the lattice, stabilizing its pulse. It's working, Lyrian shouted. The collars are failing, citywide. Valthor spun, his collar sparking wildly. No, he roared, lunging for Mirae. Toren tackled him, pain flaring in his shoulder. They hit the ground, Valthor's strength unnatural, fueled by the lattice. You're done, Bob. Toren growled, pinning him. Xylara's waking up, and you're yesterday's news. Valthor's collar exploded in light, and he threw Toren off, rising with a snarl. But before he could strike, Mirae's voice rang out, clear and commanding. Enough! The lattice blazed, its song shifting, hopeful alive. Valthor froze, his collar dimming, then crumbling. He collapsed, eyes wide, as if seeing Xylara for the first time. The drones fell silent, and the chamber stilled, the core's light steady, warm. Toren staggered to his feet, clutching his shoulder. Well, he panted, that was fun. Mirae turned, her collar gone, her skin glowing like dawn. She stepped toward him, eyes searching his. You freed us, she said, voice soft, raw. He shrugged, grinning through the pain. Team effort. You're the one who hit the big red button. She smiled, a real smile, unguarded, and the air shifted, heavy with possibility. The chamber felt too small, the lattice's hum too loud. Toren glanced at Silva and Lyrian, who nodded, slipping out to join the fight outside. He was alone with Mirae, and for once, he didn't have a quip ready. Toren, she said, stepping closer. I saw you, your heart, your pain. You gave me back mine. He swallowed, his grin softening. Yeah, well, you're not so bad yourself, Mirae. Kinda stole mine in that garden. Her hand reached for his, her fingers warm, trembling. The lattice pulsed, casting waves of light across them, and Toren felt it. A pull, like the ritual, but deeper. He stepped closer, his other hand finding her waist, and she didn't pull away. Her breath hitched, her eyes golden pools, and then she kissed him. The world dissolved. Their lips met, soft at first, then fierce like a storm breaking. Light erupted around them, the lattice singing, and crystal rain fell, each drop a star bursting against their skin. Her hands slid to his chest, his to her back, pulling her closer, and the air shimmered with heat, with life. It was more than a kiss. It was a merging, a promise, their hearts beating as one under Xylara's reborn sky. The rain faded, leaving them breathless, foreheads pressed together, the lattice's song now a lullaby. Guess that's one way to seal the deal, Toren murmured, his voice rough, teasing. Mirae laughed, a sound like music, and held him tighter. You are impossible, and you love it, he said, winking. The chamber's doors burst open, and Silva appeared, her face flushed with victory. The council surrenders, she said. The city is ours. Toren grinned, stepping back, but keeping Mirae's hand. Told you we'd pull off. 6 months later, Luminaris was unrecognizable, not in its spires, which still gleamed, but in its soul. The collars were gone, melted into art that adorned the streets. Murals of liquid crystal, sculptures of woven light. The forbidden grove was open, its flowers blooming for all, and the luminous rite had become a daily celebration. Xylarians painting with glowing sap, singing songs of love and loss. Toren stood in a plaza, his new jacket slung over his shoulder, watching a group of children chase light drops. Silva was nearby, training a militia of free Xylarians, her scars now badges of pride. Lyrian worked in a lab, her research healing the lattice's wounds, her laughter a new sound. Caliph, freed from council prisons, advised Mirae, his eyes brighter, his voice carrying a song he'd thought lost. Mirae approached, no longer a queen but a guide of light, her white robe simple, her black hair braided with crystal threads. Her skin glowed, not just with Xylara's light, but with something new, life growing within her. She touched her stomach, smiling at Toren. "You're late," she said, teasing, her golden eyes warm. Fashionably, Toren shot back, his quill grin in full force. "Had to check on the kids. They're already better rebels than me." She laughed, taking his hand. "Our child will be worse, I fear. A human's heart, a Xylarian's will." Toren's grin softened, and he pulled her close, careful of her growing belly. "A hybrid, huh? Bet they'll have my charm and your everything else. Poor kid's gonna rule the galaxy." They turned, watching the plaza fill with Xylarians for the Day of Light, a festival of art and song. A girl, no older than 10, ran up, holding a crystal vial, a vape, reimagined, its mist glowing like starlight. She handed it to Toren, giggling, then darted off. "Looks like I've got fans," Toren said, twirling the vial. He took a drag, citrus mist curling around them, and offered it to Mirae. She shook her head, laughing. "You're a bad influence," she said, leaning into him. "And you're stuck with me," he replied, kissing her forehead. The sky above shimmered, and crystal rain fell, soft and warm, a blessing from the lattice. The girl returned, standing under the drops, her eyes, green with flecks of brown, bright with wonder. She raised her hands, catching the light, and Toren felt it. A future, not just for Xylara, but for every star their child would touch. "Here's to you, kid," he whispered, raising the vape like a toast. "Make it a hell of a ride."